As a minister, storyteller, performer, and flute craftsman and player, William Woodrow Haney touched the lives of thousands. During his childhood, Woodrow lived with his grandmother, who was a proficient and respected medicine woman in her community. It was partially from his grandmother that Woodrow learned the value of hard work and the importance of helping people.
Now, Granny was telling me this one. Now, this is a fact as we going down a little trail, going after water, down from a spring, you know. She always reminds me, that's a God-given thing now. It is there for you to use, but you got to go get it. So, naturally, I learned to go get things that's available for me. Well, anyhow, one day we was walking down through the little trail, and she stopped and she said, "Hey, Jessica, I mean, you see that? It was a grasshopper just flop up, you know, just hang up in the air and just flutter, you know." And she said, "You see him? That's all he does. He just likes to dance. That's all he wants to do. He just dance all the time. He won't work." She said, "But that grasshopper won't last through this summer. He'll starve to death because he don't work for his food. But if you really want to learn something, go watch ants," she said. So I watched ants and get bit too.
Woodrow's father, Willie Haney, once a part of the Emma Dalton gang, served time in prison. An alcoholic, he changed for the better and became a minister right before Woodrow was born. Woodrow respected his father, whose influence helped direct the course of Woodrow's life. One day, Woodrow told his father about a disturbing dream he'd had.
Dad looked at me and said, "Well, what's the matter with you?" I guess I showed it on my face, you know, and I said, "Well, I just had a bad dream." "You had a bad dream?" He said, "What was it?" I said, "Well, you know," I said, dreamed that I had a big bad bull was after me with his long horns, and I was running as hard as I can, and I just woke up and to that just before he caught me. And so when my dad said, "Well, I'll tell you what it is. Wakat, which means evil spirit," he said, "is after you." He said, "You're about 12 years old, and now you're coming to the accountability of your life. And everything you do, you're going to make an account of it. And so from here on, you know the difference between right and wrong. But that evil spirit is always going to be after you to do wrong. So long as you do the thing that is right, you'll be all right. That bull never will catch you."
During these decisive teenage years, Woodrow was innocently involved in an event that would also direct his life's course.
One day, I went out and got some pecans down the valley, because it was very common among us Indian people that owned lands all up and down that valley, that anything that fell by nature, anybody can use it. Take it to the general store and sell it and buy little things to eat. Well, I was so used to it. One morning as I was laying there sound asleep, you know, and laying on the floor and rain and so, and I could just picture pecan falling. And so by the time it cleared up, I got up and I got me a sack and went on down the creek, and pecan was all over. So I started picking them up now. And I filled my buckets up and brought it back, put them in a sack, you know, and I went on to the general store.
With the little money received for the pecans, Woodrow rewarded himself with a treat.
I love Cracker Jack, you know, and so I got me Cracker Jack. Put me in a sack, and I started out. I left that store, and I come back. Next morning, I was sitting on the porch. Dad had some guests come on out there, and when the visitor came there, a couple of white people came there. They went out and they started talking, you know.
Although not aware of what had happened, Woodrow was convicted in court that day for stealing pecans. His father sold their 7 best chickens to pay the fine.
I realized later that Dad was paying my fine, that I stole pecans and we caught 7 hens of ours. That's where all our eggs is, you know. Well, anyway, that's what paid my fine. We came home, and but it made me so mad at the time when I see a white man. I hated the white man. I just flat hated the white man. And if I could, I could just chew him up right there, you know. But I was just a kid, you know.
Woodrow was able to attend 3 years of public school, learning just enough to read. Having learned about the English language, he then decided that he wanted to know more of the white man. In 1937, he and a friend went to a Colorado Civilian Conservation Corps camp for young men. Living and working with white men his own age, Woodrow began to understand some of the ways of the white man. His impressions as a boy changed as he became a man. He was further influenced by his father's Christian faith. Woodrow returned to Oklahoma, married, and began a family. He worked in Oklahoma's oil fields for a time during World War II. After returning to civilian life, Woodrow began his 26-year service in the ministry, ordained by the United States Indian Mission Conference in 1952. Through the Methodist Church, Woodrow was given the chance to study theology in summer school programs at Oklahoma City University. He studied part-time there for 17 years, taking advantage of an educational opportunity. Learning became a way of life for Woodrow.
He studies a lot. He is not what you call a formally educated person, in the sense that we know. He didn't go very far in school, but he was a well-read man. He read everything he can get his hands on. And as I recall, at the time that he was in the ministry, he studied theology as deeply as anyone with his abilities could. He studied the Bible. He read a lot of material. He didn't restrict it to anything. Just seemed like he wanted to know about everything. And so he would do that.
By becoming a minister and educating himself, Woodrow acted as a leader. He pastored many Indian churches in northeastern Oklahoma and often traveled to white churches throughout the surrounding states, sharing his heritage.
Because people are really questioning, what is an Indian? You know, a lot of people for a long time didn't know nothing but television, what they've seen on television about an Indian. And so I had to go out and had an opportunity to tell people just what is an Indian.
Woodrow's vision was to help his people adapt to the changes brought by the white man.
I became interpreter for many of our people in the district court and our county court and land sale and so. I went ahead and I sat there, and because they did not know what's going on, and the land was up for sale, what it was known as allotment land. When it was been up for sale, I seen people sit up there all in special seat, bidding in on these land. Say 150 acres, 200 acres, 300 acres, and people are really bidding in on it. And by the time they got through, every one of those bidders picked this land up about $5 an acre. And that was it. And everybody went home with land except the Indians. He went home empty, except for a little cash, and that's all he had. So I see so much of this, and I tried to stress education, and as an Indian would say, in a white man's way. I tried to teach them, you got to go his way. We are not running the country anymore. We are not ourselves anymore. We have to adjust ourselves to this new life that has come to us now. So that's how come I went into ministry, because I felt like that the ministry has provided a way for us to follow.
Woodrow's children remember their father as a man who always went out of his way to help others.
Well, there's many times I used to see people call middle of the night, 3, 4 o'clock. someone's sick, he's going to get up and he's going to go out there. That was his job. He always did that. It was not a 9-to-5 job with Dad. He always used to tell me, if there's a job to be done, you said, well, get it done. Says you spend more time trying to figure out how to do it when it'd be just as easy to get it done and get it over with than to try to figure out how not to do it.
Now, I have had young people in school call me up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Would you come and talk to us? Okay. As much as I hate, school students, we would sort of say, where's your chapel, No, I get up and I go. They want me. They don't want nobody else. I'll go there. I'll sit there and I found the students crying because they got some questions in their mind they could not answer. And so we sat down, we discussed a little bit here and a little bit there, Then they get all right. One time I got through with that, by the time I got through, they was all laying there sound asleep, So I just opened the door and walked out, went back 60 miles back home. But them kids were, were in need, They were in need.
Woodrow also helped heal some of the wounds that divided his people.
And at that time, the powwow group and the church Christian group, they would always seem to clash. They never really got together, and powwow people didn't go to church, and church people didn't go to powwow, But when he went up there, he started associating with everybody because, see what they're all about, because, and let them know what we're about. And next thing you know, we had some of their people come over to our church, and we'd go over there to their powwow, sit there and listen and watch them dance and things like that. But of course, now, it's no big thing because everybody goes. But then at one time, there was a separation. They just didn't do it. So, but he accomplished the fact that these people in this area, they had more respect for each other as you cross the lines over.
It was very confusing that we seem to have certain missionaries that came through here telling these converts, new converts, and found them back over among the traditional way, taking their medicine, because in the old days they were the only one that had a health program, herbs and so on, that take their medicine for purification, they fasting and in prayer. They did this. It was very common. So during this time, and then people come by and they told these new converts, oh, you're going to have to quit that. That's the devil's way. That's no good. They'll send you the devil. Send you to hell. That's not going to help you. And some of those Indians were confused. Some of them actually got away from the traditional way. Some of them just went back to the traditional way. And they stayed in there. Some of them went back. And next thing you know, and some of their preachers became preachers, the converts. They started preaching against his own people. Now, this was very, very common, to preach against your own people. All your traditional ways to tell me, hey, it's no good. You're doing all wrong. And so there was actually no love in it. It was just a condemnation. It was so strong that it left the Indians divided.
During a time when division was strong between the traditionalists and Christians, Woodrow was well respected by both groups.
Many of our people have come to realize that Christ did not condemn people. He helped people. He loved people. And then if you're going to be a Christian, we've got to learn to love people, of all types of people.
One time, an old friend of Woodrow's, Grant Foster, became very sick. Not listening to the advice of his friends, he refused to see a doctor. Then one friend asked Woodrow to visit him.
I went in there and I said, Grant, you sure need to see a doctor now. He said, would you take me? I said, sure, I'll take you. Come on.
Together, Woodrow and Grant went to the hospital. Grant received treatment and was put in a bed. Grant was well known as a traditionalist and was very popular in the powwow festivals.
So he was sitting there by the bed, and he said, hey, Woodrow, I've been watching you and your people working in that little church. He said, how do I become a member? I said, well, you believe in Jesus Christ, Yes, I heard about it. I said, good. Do you believe in it? He said, yeah, I believe it. I said, if you believe in it, you want to be baptized, I can baptize you right here like a Methodist does, or I'll do it in the Baptist way, immerse you in so-and-so, whichever you want. Then, oh, would you take me in? I said, sure, I'll take you in. I'd love to take you in. Then will your people be my people? I said, yeah, they're your people from here on. And so, right by the bed, he was sitting over there, and I come along, I took a glass of water and poured it on his head, and I went through everything, and he's so happy when he looked up, He said, am I a member of your church now? I said, you sure are. He said, Bessie, Guy and Hugh and all of are they my brothers and sisters? I said, they sure are. He said, yeah, but good. I'm glad. It was just like a little kid with a new toy, Oh, he was tickled,
It was in seemingly small ways like this that Woodrow made a positive impact among his people. Having learned the English language, Woodrow also served as an interpreter for his people, interpreting for Creek Nation chiefs and helping win court cases between the Creeks and government concerning tribal lands. People liked Woodrow so much that in 1956, he was asked to represent his town as its chief in their government. In 1974, Woodrow left the ministry for new types of service to people. He had been asked to teach evening classes at Bacone College in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Although only having a third-grade education, Woodrow's knowledge and insight into Native American Indian heritage and culture was highly regarded, and he taught as an instructor of the Muskogee Indian language. Although not teaching anymore, Woodrow still speaks and writes his native language, attempting to preserve his native tongue by writing it down in the forms of phrases, songs, and stories of old.
Listen to the least of these. Your wisdom will increase.
Later on in 1980, Woodrow was asked to teach at Rogers State College in Claremore, Oklahoma, as an instructor in Native American Studies, teaching flute making and silversmithing. He received the Teacher of the Year award there that year. He also worked with the National Park Service from 1973 to 79 as a storyteller, lecturing and demonstrating his flute playing as he told stories of old. Then in 1978, Woodrow received a phone call that would expand his influence nationally.
Got a call and wanted to know if I would go out and speak to kids in the schools. I told him, oh, you don't know me. I said, in fact, I'm a third grade dropout. You don't want it, do you? He said, no, but I know what you can do. And so I want you to do it for me. And I said, well, and I didn't know what to say. It done got me, So I took the job, and so I told him first, I don't have my cars. My car's just about gone. Well, how much money you need? I said, I'll take about 1,000. It's okay. Next morning I received 1,000. So I got my car, and on the road we went. Every school we went to, we talked to kids after kids, and some high schools and junior high and grade schools, and all of them.
Woodrow traveled nationwide from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., lecturing on Native American Indian culture and demonstrating his flute playing and craftsmanship. But mostly, Woodrow traveled near home, within Oklahoma and the surrounding states, speaking to school children who were amazed to see a real live Native American Indian dressed up in his colorful clothing right in front of their eyes.
But like I said, it was a very, very enjoyable thing to go out and talk to people, especially children. They're so honest. They're so true, Whatever you say, when they say they love you, they mean it, And so, and that actually, it's really wonderful to be with the kids. Like one time in Georgia, I was on television, and one day they come along and said, hey, we're going to have some children come up here on the bus. Been on this bus. They're going to come up here and want to talk to you. I said, okay, good. And we're going to divide about 35. I looked over there and I seen that bus come out there, and a bunch of kids come out of there, you know. One little kid in front of it, you know, it's coming ahead. And he was heading towards me, you know, like, God, don't talk to this Indian, huh? He came up to me and I looked down. I said, hello, boy. He got so disappointed when I spoke in English, you know. He looked down and looked at his group and he said, he ain't no Indian. He said, he's human. He said.
Woodrow became a public figure as he gave public demonstrations, was featured in magazines, and even played his flute for the State House of Representatives at the Oklahoma State Capitol. One of his most memorable events was an invitation from the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. to lecture and give flute demonstrations during the celebration of the United States' 200th birthday in 1976. The flute is Woodrow's link to the past as well as to his own inner feelings. With the flute, Woodrow creates music from the melody in his soul.
This little boy, this orphan boy, was thrown down and he rolled on up to a group of trees. And he jumped up and he ran into the woods and he started running on the in the deer trails. And as he was going through those deer trails, just freely running and enjoying life, and then he kept feeling something. Finally, he stopped. When he listened, all of a sudden, there was a great spirit that was trying to get hold of him. And the great spirit said to him, son, here I wanted to talk to you. I've been trying to get hold of you, and now I want to talk to you. He said, all right, what is it? The great spirit said, you are a sad person. You're a sad boy. And I want to give you something which will give you a life, a better life. And so he gave him a wood. And so he followed the instruction. And by the time he got through, he had a flute made up. And so the Great Spirit says, now take this flute and play that. And that's a sacred flute. And it'll always be sacred because you remember this, always. Remember, the top hole represents the Great Spirit. The second hole represents the Mother Earth. The next four holes represents the four great spirits which existing among us. And so long as you remember and play these flute to comfort your soul, and those that hear the sound of it will also receive comfort in their soul. So now I want you to have this and get your music from the woods.
Woodrow became very interested in the old Indian flute in 1969. He gathered instruction on how to make the flute and immediately began crafting his own sacred instruments. Not only does the flute allow Woodrow to communicate musically, but its uniqueness has served as a communication bridge to those enchanted by its song. Woodrow tells those attracted by the flute about the Native American Indian, his heritage and culture. There were only a few known flute craftsmen and players remaining. The old craft had all but passed away until another craftsman and player was found, as Woodrow passed on the sacred art of the flute to his grandson, Keith Ruminer.
I guess I had to have been about 8 or 9 years old, and that's when Grandpa had me to learn to build these flutes. I had been hearing him play since I was a lot younger than that, and so I learned to play a lot younger than that, and later I took up the talent of building them.
I think one of the things I've always been intrigued with is this flute playing. You know, a while ago when I was listening to play a while ago, I started to walk by, but I stopped there. And it's always did it to me. It's always done it to my children. And I notice it does this to people who are around when he plays his flute. Everybody just gets real quiet and just sits there and listens, you know. And it's just as intriguing as his voice when he starts talking.
But he has an ear for nature, and much of the stories and sounds that come from his flute, and they are stories and sounds, because basically that's what he's doing. He's telling a story. He will sit out in the woods, and in the evening time when you sit around, you hear all kinds of sounds, crickets, the birds, the wind, all of these things, and he takes those sounds and he creates those into a melody of nature.
William Woodrow Haney has spent his lifetime communicating with people, whether through the form of words or echoing notes of his flute. Woodrow became a great communicator by watching and listening to others. This open, receptive spirit is what attracts people to Woodrow.
The times that we spent as children, he used to get us together. We'd sit on the floor and he'd sit and tell us stories about the Bible, stories in the Bible, and how we should measure our life up to the way it was. How we should be when we get out in the public, meeting the public, meeting people, getting along with people, but being careful about the things that we do.
He was a really good listener, but when he spoke, he had a voice that carried. I used to hear the biggest compliments about him in his ministry, because he didn't need no speaker, and yet when he spoke, he felt what he spoke. When he preached, what he was feeling. When he cried, it wasn't made up. It was there. That's what it was all about.
We sat around talking, and he said, I might not have left y'all with a whole lot, but he says, I've given you guys the gift of speaking. He said, with that gift, you can go anywhere, any place in the world and find a friend.
William Woodrow Haney, a life well spent as a minister, storyteller, performer, and flute craftsman and player. A life given to people.